exalt. Hey, Harrison's here. He was looking for you last week. Good evening. Whoa. I did not mean to do that. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. We just want to welcome you here to our services tonight. We will be having class in a few minutes, so we'll have a little devotional in here together, and then we'll break for class, and there'll be a class in here with Tim McCafferty. There'll be a class in there with Sonny Owen. There will be a class over there with the teens, and there will be the New Berea kids will be back here with my wife tonight. She'll be doing the class back there tonight. So thank you for being here tonight. If you're not worshiping anywhere regular, we'd love to have you come be a part of our family here at Woodlawn. You're welcome to come back with us on Sunday morning. We have our worship at 9 o'clock, and then Bible class follows, and then we come back at 5 o'clock that afternoon. And we are taking pictures. If you'll notice, we have the two backdrops up there. We are doing pictures. We'll be doing that Sunday. For those people that would like to get their picture made for the directory, I said that wrong. Because from what I found, about 95% of people don't want to get their picture made for the directory. So, not if you want to get your picture made for the directory, you need to get your picture for the directory. Because we have new families and they don't know who you are. And if you ever get offended when those new families come up and they don't know who you are, it's because we don't have an updated directory to give to them. And that's an easy way that we can make sure we get that updated directory. So come in early, stay after Sunday morning worship, and wear whatever clothes you want to wear. You best, if you want to all wear the same color, that's fine. If you all want to all wear different colors, that's fine. If you want to wear camo, Davey, that's fine too. But we just want your picture. We know how you look because we see you every service. So a picture's not going to change that. But please help us out and stay with that. We didn't have many stay last week to get theirs made, and we really need to get that done as quick as we can. Along the lines of that, we still have that directory back in the back for you to check to make sure if there's any changes. Make sure you put your email address on there so that we can have that. Sick of our number, it's about the same that we've had. We want to continue to remember Linda Lumpkins and Les O'Kelly as they're still recovering. Linda's had a rough go. She fell earlier in the week on Sunday and has been recovering, so just keep her in your prayers. Also, we want to, along the lines of that, we want to thank Jeff Butler. Jeff went and picked up our new bus that we have. We have a new bus out here. It's newer. It's 2016. It's a wheelchair accessible bus. It's going to help us out when we're able to pick up our people that are in wheelchairs. But the problem is somebody stole the catalytic converter off that one too. So Jeff drove it back from Chattanooga without a catalytic converter on it. Did you get some looks? Did you get any? So we appreciate Jeff going through the embarrassment of that at the red lights and stuff. But we thank you for bringing that in, and we'll have to get that fixed. That's 3 buses, 3 catalytic converters. So we're make sure you watch your cars before you leave tonight. Other things we want to announce, this coming Sunday, we have our involvement meeting. It's our second one. We had one a couple weeks ago, but we're trying to get some stuff nailed out for the theme for the year. We're trying to get some different things scheduled for next year. We're looking at bringing back our Day of Hope, Christ Over Cancer, to do that again. It's been about 4 or 5 years, I think, since we've done that, maybe 5 years or so since we've done that last, and we're talking about doing that again and some other things. So please, if you're on that committee, or if you'd like to be on that committee, just come a little early, 4:15, and you can come get your picture made, and then you come in there for a meeting for just a few minutes, and we'll get some stuff nailed down for that. I want to remind everybody about this, the last Sunday of the month that is coming up. That is our 5th Sunday contribution. We want to push that. This is the last one of the year, I believe. And we want to push that because all the contribution for the fifth Sunday goes to our building fund that we can use. So please take care of that. Trunk or treat will be that Sunday as well, the 31st. We'll be having our chicken stew. There's a sign-up sheet in the back. I don't think it has any names on it yet, but we're going to put ours on there for chicken stew. You can bring any type of stew, and we have a competition. I think Larry has won one. I think Ronnie has won one. And I think we've done three. I can't remember who won the other one, but we have prizes for the best, the goodest soup, and then a prize for the most unique. I think that would have been Davies, right? Wasn't yours different last year? Yeah. So please sign up for that so that we can have a good turnout for that. We'll invite all of our neighbors that come to our trunk or treat. They stay for our stew, and we enjoy that time and fellowship together. Youth announcements are Exalt this weekend. They'll be going to Exalt, this Sunday, on Sunday night after services. And want to remind them of that. Again, good to have you here. I've got the invitation. John's got the singing. And Keith South, who is able to be here tonight, his work schedule is crazy, but we're glad that he's able to be here tonight. He's going to lead us in our closing prayer tonight. So let's all stand as John starts us off in our singing. Oh, I forgot those.
Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. Heaven salvation, worship of God, born of the Spirit, washed in His blood. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect salvation, always at rest. I am my Savior, and happy and blessed, watching and waiting, looking above, filled with His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. Some morning we shall see Jesus in the air, coming after you and bringing joy His eyes to share. What rejoicing there will be when the saints shall rise, headed for that jubilee under in the skies. Oh, what singing, oh, what shouting, on that happy morning when we all shall rise. Oh, what glory, hallelujah, when we meet our blessed Savior in the skies. When with all that heavenly host we begin to sing, singing in the Holy Ghost, how the heavens will ring. Millions there will join the song, with Him we shall be, praising Christ who ages long, heaven's jubilee. Oh, what singing, oh, what shouting, on that happy morning when we all shall rise. Oh, what glory, hallelujah, when we meet our blessed Savior in the skies.
You know I do this all the time, but I had a sticky note right here with two important announcements that I needed to make, and I didn't make them. But we have two deaths that we want to let people know about. Kathy Rose's uncle, Alvin Scott Jr., passed away today here at Nancy. We've had him on our prayer list, and I think it's related to Ken. I think it's a cousin of Ken's, so just keep that family in your prayers. And also learned today, Billy Howard called and told me today that Ernest Gold's brother, Lamar Gold, passed away, and that is in Columbia, Tennessee. I don't have any arrangements on that, but we'll see if we can get those as quick as we can, and I'll put that on the phone tree. If it's in the morning, I'll put it in the morning. If it's late in the evening, I may wait till the next day, but we should know something about that, about both of these pretty soon. So just keep those two families in your prayers. You got your Bibles tonight. You're supposed to have them with you. Let's go to Philippians real quick. In Philippians, it's a letter of joy. It's a letter of happiness and trying to find that joy. Rejoice evermore, always rejoice. Paul is encouraging. And when he writes this, he writes it to the church at Philippi. And from what I gather, it looks like the church at Philippi, the community at Philippi, is kind of like a retirement home for some Roman soldiers. It's kind of like a community of Roman soldiers that are there, that live there. And when you look, you see a lot of Roman soldier language throughout this book, just sprinkled all through it. He calls Epaphroditus in chapter 2, he calls him his, if you look in chapter 2, he says, I've thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, my fellow worker, and my fellow soldier. Back over in chapter 1, he says, verse 12, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me about Paul being in prison, because this is a prison epistle, he's in prison when he writes this, he says that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. So it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. So the whole guard, the imperial guard there, has been aware of Paul's imprisonment, and the gospel has been furtherance because of Paul being there. And we just see so many other things here, and I want you to look through the last chapter here. I don't know, this may bore you, but this doesn't bore me. This is cool stuff to me. But if you look at the last chapter in verse 21, it says, greet every saint in Christ Jesus. The brothers who are with me greet you. This is how he closes out the letter. And then he says, all the saints greet you, especially those of Caesar's household. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with your spirit. Now, the Caesar here is Nero. He's Caesar during the time of when this is writing. Now, we know about Nero. Nero was the one who burned Jerusalem, burned the city, and then burned Rome, and then blamed the Christians for it. Remember that? Blaming the Christians for it. He was known to take Christians and stick wooden spears, wooden stakes up their backsides to where they come out their mouth, dip them in hot oil just to light up his garden at night. He's known for taking Christians and filleting them and having them roll around in salt. And we find out that there are Christians, the saints, greet you, especially those who are in Caesar's household. We can do a little reading, and you can find probably a lot of different things. And I don't know if there's a whole lot of evidence for this, but in doing some reading this week, I found out that there are at least a good portion of people that believe Epaphroditus, who Paul talks about here, worked in Caesar's household. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of scholarship out there that says he was Nero's secretary. Could you imagine that? Here is a man who was sickened to death for a period of time and is Paul's helper and helping Paul, and he's sending him out to the church at Philippi to encourage them, and yet when he goes to work, he's having to work with a ruthless ruler who's killing some of his brethren at the same time while he's working for him, trying to serve the Lord and serve in his job at the same time. Now, you think about your day and you think about all the complaining that you've had over the last few days about your job or about your situation or about your home life or about what you've been going through, and then you put yourself in Epaphroditus' shoes. And it puts all of our little small problems about like that. And we see here's a man who is willing to endure all of that stuff that he must have gone through. All of those things that he must have seen to continue to be faithful for the furtherance of the gospel, to continue to share the message of the cross. And some say he was even kicked out of Caesar's household because he rebelled against them because of his faith. I don't know if that's the case. I don't know if he worked for Nero. Maybe it was another Epaphroditus. Maybe could be somebody else. But I think it's definitely worth our consideration to allow our minds wander for just a little bit and imagine what his life must have been like and how he remained faithful in the midst of all the trials and situations that he had to deal with. And then I look at my little life. And I look at all of the opportunities that I have that he didn't have, but he made. I look at all the situations that I might complain about, all the small things that I might have to deal with that are nothing in comparison to the things that he had to deal with. And I look at him as a man who had joy and happiness because of who he was. Because he wasn't just Epaphroditus. He was a child of God. And there's a big difference. There's a difference in me being just Matt. There's a difference in you being just Jim. There's a difference in you just being Kate. It's the difference that you are a child of God. And along with that carries joy, happiness, peace. And it doesn't matter what is going on in this world. We can still have it. So tonight I ask you to look at your life. Do you have that joy? Do you have that peace? Do you have that encouragement? And if you don't, well, I know where you can get it. Jesus is here. The blood is here. Your family is here. The word is here. The truth is here. It's all here for you to take advantage of. But it must be something that you seize. It can't be seized for you. So if you need Jesus tonight, if you need forgiveness, if you need salvation, we give you a chance to do that here tonight as we stand and sing that song of encouragement.
to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. So what we get from this, Paul, you'll remember, was a later apostle, and there were many people that did not believe that he was an apostle. They didn't believe that he had really converted. You know, when he was first converted, a lot of people stayed away from him because they were afraid that he was going to turn them over to the Roman officials who were out to get Christians. And so here he's saying, you know, I could boast a lot more than I do, but I'm not going to. But he's boasting here and telling about these things so that the people who are listening to him will know, you know, a man wouldn't go through this, the persecution that he is, unless he's sincere about what he's doing. You know, it wouldn't take many of these things that he mentions here and mentions in other places as well, that somebody do to me that I might turn coat. You know, I might just say, no, I'm not, because it was something that brought him very near death in several occasions. So he tells this to these Corinthian brethren, and he says here, an inflated sense of self-importance is incompatible with the Christian faith. So Paul is trying to be careful here and trying to be a little less braggy if he needs to, but he really had to do this to an extent to let these people know that those other people that are saying they're Christians and that they're apostles and all these kinds of things, they would know that they are behind Christ, or behind Paul. Paul mentions about being someone going to up into heaven, and everybody pretty well believes that this was Paul that did this. Paul is speaking of himself, but speaking of it kind of in the third person, so he's not saying, oh, look, I took advantage of this. I was in heaven. I know all these things. But the disciples of Christ in the main had problems. They had a lot of problems, a lot of persecution. And they were supposed to be remaining humble during these things. And some have looked at this and said that Paul wasn't very humble. But Paul had a very thin line to walk, I guess you would say, as one who was a person in the Jewish church. Most believed that he was, in fact, a member of the Sanhedrin. He was very important. And now he has flipped and become a Christian minister, which I guess you couldn't get much farther apart than those two things. But he had to tell people what he did and what they were to expect of him, because he had changed. And that's kind of what we have looked here. He mentions that he had a thorn in the flesh, and this was something that people have argued about and tried to give some kind of supposition exactly what it is. And we really don't know. He doesn't just come out and say this is what it is. Now, everybody has their opinion. As far as I think about it, I think he had some type of eye trouble. He speaks sometimes about writing with big letters, some of the letters that he actually penned himself. I think it was the Galatians that he said that they would have given me their very eyes if I had wanted them to. And of course, that wouldn't be possible, but why would they give him their eyes if he didn't need some eyes? Some troubles there. But whatever it was, it kept him from being where people could look at him without some kind of, aversion. He had to speak, and he had to speak fluently, I guess you'd say, to get people to continue to listen to him. And God was not going to take away this thorn in the flesh. He tells us here that he had pleaded 3 times for God to take away the thorn in the flesh. But he says that God says, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is made greater in your weakness. We might look at someone who is not very strong and maybe kind of mousy or something else, but might do a fabulous job preaching the gospel. And it's because they are doing something they know God wants them to. And Paul here is doing exactly the same thing. He might have weaknesses, but he was going to overcome those. He was not going to sit idly by and say, well, I've got weaknesses, so I can't do this, that, or the other. But he became one of the strongest, I guess you would say, through his persecutions and hardships, one of the best or best known of the apostles, writing a lot of stuff. So we have to look at the sufficiency of the grace. God protected him, God looked out for him, and God helped him. It says relationships can be tricky to navigate, and Paul's association with the Corinthians was certainly complicated. It's not only that Paul was, he's an apostle, and he is teaching these people with this infirmity, whatever it might be, and they were people who did not, they were not, in a lot of places, thank you, I thought I was going blind. It was a thing that Paul had to come in here. He was a former Jew, and he was coming now to preach the gospel to the Corinthians, and then they had some very sore problems. It was in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 that Paul was telling about a man who had taken his father's wife, which most people believe was his stepmother, and he had to address that, and he was very strongly addressing it. And so, that was something that could make all these people mad. It seems that the Corinthians had drawn somewhat of a smug thought about themselves, that here's this man doing this awful sin, and we're happy with it. We are being kind to him. We're being helpful to him. And that's what's happened, is they were not turning him over to Satan, as Paul said, but they're just putting up with it. And of course, if we put up with sin, if we know someone has a great sin and we're putting up with it, then a lot of people would say, well, this sin's worse than mine, so, I'll just go ahead and do what I'm doing because he's going ahead and nobody's talking to him. And so Paul had to deal with it. And I think that the way that we get into 2 Corinthians is that we find that they had forgiven him, or were in the process of doing that. Paul had first visited the commercial city of Corinth during his second missionary journey. If you want to read about that, that's Acts 8, chapter 18. It says his time in Corinth included meeting Aquila and Priscilla. Now, I don't know how he came to meet them, but they were tent makers, and he was a tent maker. So they probably met through that. But they were preaching in the synagogue, and were preaching they were preaching, and then they came upon Apollos that was not preaching the whole gospel. He may have been preaching the baptism of John and not Christ, but they helped him along. And because all of these were tent makers, they were staying together. You might say they were a group. Now, we noticed that it has a footnote about this tent maker. It said, tent makers may indicate those who work with leather or canvas to fashion temporary structures used for dwellings or even theater props. So they were, when you say you were a tent maker, it may not be that you just built tents. You may have done a number of things with leather. And so Paul and Aquila and Priscilla were doing these same things. Now we know that it says here that he did convert Crispus, and among others, because they believed that Jesus was the Messiah. Paul faced opposition too. He was brought before Gallio, the proconsul of Achaia, although he was released after a brief hearing. Many people, would bring charges against Paul, and probably most of the time they were probably right. We're charging him with being a Christian. We're charging him with kind of stirring up the people, and therefore, that's what we don't want. But when he came together with these people, like the proconsul here, he came to him and he talked to him, and it didn't take long to prove that he was not the vicious person that these other people thought he might be. So, as it says, he was released after just a short time. It says, Paul returned to Antioch, leaving a new group of believers behind him, a group that included mostly those who lacked education, power, status, and wealth. It was a strange thing in this Bible time for people to know how to read and write and do all of these things. So generally, those people who could not read and write understood the stories that Paul would have used as illustrations. And of course, all the apostles did this, and Jesus himself did this. It was so he could give them a story that they could remember and therefore apply it. In 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 and 28, it says, "For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in this world to shame the wise. God chose what was weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing those things that are." Jesus did not pick people that were, sitting on thrones and had great worldly power. He wasn't getting the people in the Greek or in the Jewish fellowship. He was not getting many of them to, say, I don't want to be this Jew anymore, I want to become a Christian. We know that there were some people that felt that way, but they refused to name Jesus and follow Paul because they would have gotten kicked out of the synagogue. That wasn't going to be something that was going to be good for them. And we always have to remember that according to the Jewish way of life, the synagogue was the legal, the synagogue was the social, it was the religious, and so really everything these people did was connected with the synagogue, and of course they're being Jews. So these people that did not have education and status and all of this were given education and status by listening to the apostles and others that were teaching the truth about Jesus. So they had to learn things as well. We do know that the religious leaders of that time, the Jewish religious leaders, did not take much time up with those who didn't have an education or weren't rich or status, this kind of thing. They just dealt with the people that were important, as most people would say. The new converts, of course, faced a lot of problems. It says here that they faced ethical problems, theological problems, and social challenges. And that, again, is because the Jewish religion had so encapsulated, I guess you'd say, that it was hard to get people to listen. But you take people who are not cared for by one group, they'll get cared for by another. So Paul and the others taught in order that these people might have what God wants them to have. There are a lot of people, I guess, well, not so much today, but maybe go 50 years back, that probably there were some that couldn't read. I knew a fellow that was going to church with us at North Carolina, that he could do anything, make an X for his name. He couldn't read. He was a successful farmer. He did a great job, raised a big family, but just couldn't read. And so he had problems, which of course you and I wouldn't have, being able to read. But when it got down to the push come to shove, he wouldn't have been important to the Jews because he just really didn't have any education. So it says here that these tests, these ethical, theological, and social challenges, said these tests serve as a basis for a series of letters and visits between Paul and the Corinthians that likely took place over a few years. Now, there have been people over the years to say that there are letters to the Corinthians that we don't have, and some from the Corinthians to Paul that we don't have. And that's what he goes into here. Said it's interesting, including one, our letter of 1 Corinthians. Then, two, an earlier letter that Paul had written, and it's brought out in 1 Corinthians chapter 5 at verse 9. He says, I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral people. So he says, I wrote to you in this letter, but it's not 1st or 2nd Corinthians. It's another letter. Then number 3, a letter or letters from the Corinthians addressed to Paul. And this is in 1 Corinthians 7:1. It says, now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. And of course he goes on to explain what he's saying, but he says, I sent you something, you sent me something. And that's the way Paul kept up with who was doing what. Then 4, there was a painful visit. Paul made to Corinth, then 2 Corinthians 2:1 says, for I made up my mind not to make another painful visit to you. He had made one, and now he said, I just don't want to make another one. But then it says, number 5, another letter was written by Paul with many tears. He mentions this in 2 Corinthians 2 and verse 4. It says, for I wrote to you out of much affliction and anguish of heart, and with many tears, not to cause you pain, but to let you know the abundant love that I have for you. So there was some correspondence between Paul and these Corinthians that we actually don't have the piece of paper that happened. But we do know that the Corinthians were interested enough in what Paul had to say to be writing back and forth, be corresponding with him in order that he might tell them what they needed. We can only imagine if Paul were in our congregation, the questions we would have. You know, that would be his Wednesday night lesson. He'd just stand here and answer your questions, and they would be the right answers. So, you know, these people were taking advantage of the ear of this apostle because they needed to know some things. And says it gets down to that place where he has to write something sorrowful to them. It was that he knew it was the thing to write to them, but it wasn't making him happy. We may have those same kinds of things with people that we know or associate with that have problems that we really don't like to talk about, that we prayerfully pray about it, but we still have to bring these things up. It says, by the time of the writing of the last section of 2 Corinthians, several issues had developed that strained the relationship between Paul and the Corinthians. It says, earlier, an individual had publicly opposed Paul, but that issue had been rectified. This is in 2 Corinthians 2, 5 through 11. Now, well, let me just give you the gist of this. He says, you know, I have cause to be sad about this, and I am sad about it. Said, but I don't want to put it too severely to all of you. Says, for such an one, this punishment by the majority is enough. Now, what he's talking about here is that I think he's having reference to the man that had his father's wife. And he said, you know, the punishment that you have rendered, the punishment that you have put on him, the majority have, he says that now that you should turn to forgive him and to comfort him, that he might not be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. Now, if the church was doing their job in removing fellowship, then this had an effect upon this man, because they hadn't been doing anything at all about this. Well, Paul more or less tells them, you got to do something about this. And that brought sorrow to this man, and he said, now that he is in sorrow, you need to take him back as a brother and bring him back into the fold, so to speak, and not just continually look at him as an outcast. And of course, that's what he talks about, it turning one over to Satan in order that he might be saved. They're going to put him pretty much out of the church, or ostracize him, and then he changed his mind. And Paul says, okay, you've done enough. Now take him back. So that was something that Paul didn't really want to deal with, but he had to. The Corinthians felt insulted because Paul did not accept financial assistance from them as he did from the other churches. Now that was a little unusual when I read that, but he gives a verse here, chapter 12, at verse 13, says, For in what were you less favored than the rest of the churches, except I did not burden you, forgive me this wrong. The idea is that Paul did not take their money as he did other churches. Now, there's probably something more to that than is read here, but he decided not to do that, and they were kind of put out because of it. You know, they were wanting to give, and he wasn't wanting to take it. Again, there may be a lot more than this to what meets our just glance at first, but they wanted to give. He didn't want to take it, and they didn't take it lightly. They took it as kind of an insult to them. But it says a group of rivals had emerged that Paul mockingly described as super apostles, and we know that's what he referred to in 2 Corinthians 12:11. This is from the ESV. It says, I have been a fool. You forced me to it. For I ought to have been commanded by you, for I was not at all inferior to those super apostles, even though I am nothing. Again, staying with the theme that he's not going to brag on himself to make himself better than these other people, but he is. He calls them super apostles because they're going around telling how great they are. You know, they're really telling about themselves and how great they are. And Paul says, you know, that's one of the reasons that I have maybe sounded like a fool by bragging on myself as much as I have. But they had to learn that these super apostles were nothing like Paul, that Paul was head and shoulders above them, and he had to make that clear. And again, they claimed that Paul's letters were weighty and strong, but his bodily presence was weak and his speech contemptible. Well, it doesn't matter that Paul was an orator or not. He was speaking the truth. And they said that his letters were kind of tough. They really put they put the monkey on their back. You know, you've got to fix this. This is your church. And then it says that his bodily presence was weak. Now, that may get back to what his thorn in the flesh was. I don't know. But it says that his speech is contemptible. And that's hard to know why they would call it contemptible. I haven't really ever heard anybody say anything about his speech, but of course his thorn in the flesh may have been something about that. But he did the very best that he could. His opponents were boasting about their apostolic credentials over against Paul's. You know, this is what I got and this is what Paul's got. But Paul was worried that the Corinthians might be carried away after those people if he did not prove to them who he was and tell them what he had done, even though it might seem bragging. It says that they may have been in danger of slipping away from Paul. Of course, we don't want that to happen. So he continues to be strong and you know, to be demanding, even as Christ was. He says Paul responded to his critics by listing some of his sufferings for the cause of Christ. And you know, again, these are listed. This gives you chapter 11, verses 21 through 33. And he just lists a multitude of these things. He says, are they servants of Christ? Talking about these super apostles. I am better. I'm better than they are. I'm a better one. I'm talking like a madman with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, far more countless beatings, and more often death. And then he just lists some things. He says, 5 times I received at the hand of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. 1 time I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, in danger from robbers, in danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brethren, in toil and hardships, though many sleepless nights, in hunger and thirst, often without food and cold due to exposure. So, he names all of those, and, it makes us think, well, I don't think anybody did ever do as much as he did or was as much in trouble as he was. The Jews were trying to stop him because, as it was, he went from the top of the Jewish hierarchy to being an apostle of Christ, and they didn't like that. If somebody could turn away from the position that he was in to be a Christian, then a whole lot of people might follow him. So the Jews had it in for him. But he names these things right here just to make sure that these people know, I have been through it. And these apostles over here, these super apostles, hadn't been through anything. So, that's where he's trying to convince them to listen to him. He says he doesn't get anything by boasting. And, of course, really nobody ever really does. They may stand before people and boast, and people may listen to them, but then they'll probably talk about it once they get outside. He said that he was telling this strange story about an out-of-body experience. This man that he knew 14 years ago went up to the heavens, and the Jews, I think, had as many as 7 heavens, 7 levels. Now, we only know about 3 that they talk about most of the time, and that is, you have the heaven where the birds fly, then you have the heaven where the stars and moon and the planets are, and then you have the heaven where God is. So when they talk about going up to the 3rd heaven, they're talking about being in the very presence of God. But even though he had this great experience, he tells us that these revelations and these things that he's seeing, he can't talk about. He says it doesn't do anybody any good for me to talk about how it is in heaven. He says, I don't want to brag, but if I have to because of my opponents, then I am very capable of telling you all these things that I've been through. And he was trying to justify himself for bragging. But it was something these people needed to hear. Paul's credentials, of course, include a direct relationship with Christ. Paul tells his story about this person in Christ, referring to himself in the 3rd person, that went up to heaven, went up to the 3rd heaven. This writer says he may be using a lot of sarcasm here, and may be. Kind of hard to see sarcasm in writing like you can when somebody's doing it in front of you. But that's what he says, that's the way he's looking at it. So this experience was evidently a major event in Paul's life. And I mean, I would think it would if he was swept up to heaven. It says he remembers exactly the year, 14 years ago. But he also intentionally fuzzy on the details. He said, in body or out of the body, I do not know. He didn't want people to press him, okay, you were in heaven, what'd you see? What's going on up there? What did God say? And all these kind of many things. And Paul knew that they had the gospel. Paul had the gospel. He was sharing it with them. And he knew that there didn't need to be anything added to it about his seeing things in heaven. And, of course, like I said, he was being told not to do that, not to tell of these things, not to talk about them. And as far as we know, he didn't. Paul's description of his own apotheosis, this is a word that is divine importance at the bottom of the page, said it refers to the assimilation of a human person to a god, that he had maybe talking about our change. Now, Paul wasn't saying that he was going to be changed into a god. It just simply means that his life in each day was pressing him toward a godliness that was probably bigger than a lot of people's. Each one of us are wanting to do that. Now, again, we're not wanting to change into a god. Our Mormon friends believe that's possible, but we don't. We're not going to be changed into a god, but we can get more and more like God each day that we live. Paul even said that we reflect the glory of God, and therefore he wants to do that. He said this is intended to place him not in the place of God, but in a close proximity to God. Paul knows his place. He understands his mortal and acknowledges there are some things permissible to utter and some things that aren't. So he just didn't. He kept the faith, I guess you'd say. We also know that there were many false religions in his day. There were a lot of pagan. Today, I guess we can't say that we have that many pagan religions. We just got people that just don't have religion. They just don't, they're not worshiping idols. Of course, we can very easily fall into that trap. You know, anything that I put between me and God is an idol. So, you know, some people may be at home tonight watching television. Now, there's no sense in that. Our television record all that stuff for you. You do it when you get home. So you don't need to. But the idea is there's people that let television, something on television, keep them away from services. And we need to be cautious about that, because we may find ourselves wanting to see that television more than we want to see God. And that's bad. He says that to guarantee Paul's humility, he was given this thorn in the flesh. It says he describes the thorn sarcastically as a gift, a messenger from Satan. In other words, Paul, he said, you know, I've seen all these things. I've seen the grandeur of heaven, and I've seen all these miracles and all that kind of stuff, and that could really kind of blow me to be not so humble. I might be really proud of myself. But it says that God allowed Satan to give him this messenger, this thorn in the flesh, to keep his feet on the ground. You know, he was still human. If God maybe had given him, you know, if he had gotten rid of the thorn, then Paul may have thought more of himself than he was supposed to. And so Paul kept that thorn, and after asking God 3 times, he decided that was, you know, I've just got to keep it. The thorn in the flesh, it evidently is something that manifests itself physically that brought some sort of pain and humiliation to Paul. So, you know, we can probably say it was something that was visible, something that maybe he couldn't talk plain. We just don't know. But that's something to ponder. All right, we'll take up there next week, and of course, we'll probably finish this with our questions and everything next week, and then we'll start the new study the week after, Lord willing. Thank you so much for being here.